This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Dave McDonald.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
We have an awesome show for you this week, even though there is no guest, because we are going to talk about all kinds of, and I know we don't do this enough on this show. You guys, if you watch this show a lot, you may think to yourself sometimes, I really wish these guys would talk about different ways that classical musicians use the internet. And we're going to talk about all of those things, but first we're going to talk about this guy who you may not have heard of because nobody had heard of him until he wrote a really jerky blog post. His name is Anthony Alfidi, and you should burn that into the hate part of your memory because he wrote an incredibly jerky response to the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra musicians who are still on strike and we are told are continuing in negotiations with the San Francisco Symphony management, which is good because we've seen a lot of these situations where the sides are not talking at all. I believe that is still the case in Minnesota. So they are talking. But anyway, this guy, Anthony Alfidi, I'm going to call him Tony.
Hey, Tony.
Tony.
He offers to.
Tony Alfidi. So he says that the San Francisco Symphony musicians are asking for something that is completely unreasonable because they do not do anything valuable. They do not do anything very skilled. He says that he played bassoon in high school, I think, or something. I don't know. But he says that they don't do anything that a talented high school student could do for $85,000. Obviously, they should be getting paid much more than $85,000, and indeed they are when they're playing.
And just so everyone knows, he offered to perform.
Oh yes,
on triangle or tambourine, and I'm really certain he's probably a horrible percussionist. To be honest with you.
Well, he does say that he has never. He doesn't know how to read music. But he has.
How did he play the bassoon then?
I don't think he actually played the bassoon. I think I made that up. He does say that he doesn't know how to read music, but he has seen people, I guess, maybe on television.
He's seen people
play
do
the triangle and the tambourine, and they look easy. So he can definitely do that, which I think makes sense. I mean, I think what Peyton Manning does looks pretty easy. I could do that, right?
Yeah, we all could do it.
Whatever. Just throwing a ball, right? Anyway, I would like to watch him try to play Scheherazade on the tambourine. What do you guys think of these investors getting into this discussion? There was also, I should say, a piece not quite as not quite as acidic as Anthony Alfidi's piece in Bloomberg Business Week. That was kind of along the same lines, that saying that this, as a business problem, this is, I mean, the musicians have no argument. They have no leg to stand on because they get paid so stinking much, according to this Bloomberg article, and they don't do anything that's that special or that there's a lot of demand for. What do you guys think?
Well, it just illustrates what people think. I'm into photography and I'm a musician, and those are two things that people invariably end up thinking that people that do those things love it so much that they'll do it for free in almost any circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that these people are probably more surprised that they can't get a volunteer orchestra just from people around town in New York that sounds as good as the Phil, or in San Francisco that sounds as good as the San Francisco Orchestra.
Well, they can get a volunteer orchestra, and they call them civic orchestras, and they're fun for the people that are in them, but they're not very good.
Sometimes they're pretty darn good, but they're not going to rip up Miraculous Mandarin or anything like that.
Exactly. They're not playing that kind of rep, and they're not playing, when they do, they're not playing it very well. And that's fine. Like there's a place for that, and I love amateur musicians. They are an amazing group of people that I find personally very inspiring, but they're not the same thing as the San Francisco Symphony. And one thing that Alfidi points out is that he doesn't think people would recognize the difference. Do you guys think that there's a problem?
I think he has he has a strong point. I think if, as an example that you were using, if the San Francisco Symphony was replaced with just a good civic orchestra, and they did the kind of rep that they're capable of
The
doing.
good civic orchestras do.
Yeah.
And in
I
a big
think
city like
people
San
like
Francisco,
Alfidi would like that more and think that's a more valuable thing. If they can go and see a Pops concert every 2 weeks, that's what they would like. That's what they would consider
I don't
valuable.
know. I feel like you'd notice the difference. It's a San Francisco Symphony.
I would notice the difference. I'm saying a D-bag like Alfidi would not notice the difference.
well,
Yeah,
and I
I
think
don't-
it's important to point out that there's room in this world for both, right?
Absolutely.
This is I think a key thing that we can have both the Civic Orchestra and the San Francisco Symphony together, and they can serve different constituencies or even the same constituency in different ways. But to equate the two is to demonstrate how much of an idiot you are on the topic.
I feel like anyone who's who loves classical music isn't champing at the bit to go see the Civic Orchestra, though.
Really?
No. I mean, I feel like it's just, if you are somewhat familiar with classical music and you've heard of these great orchestras, that's the orchestra you want to go to see. You don't want to just be like, oh well, I'm going to join my club and.
But what I'm saying
wherever
is
it
you can go see both of them, right? And
I mean,
this is we're getting a little off track.
Yes.
But the problem here is something that we've seen before, if nowhere else in the comments of the newspaper articles about these kinds of stories, is that people outside of classical music don't seem to really understand what's going on here, what the role of the union is here, and there have been some interesting blog posts written in response to Anthony Alfidi, not least of which was by, I want to say it was Bill Eddins on the Sticks and Drones blog on the Inside the Arts Network. And you should check that out. And he kind of explains what the whole point of these negotiations are. And one of the things that's problematic is how the administration pays itself and pays management differently than the way it pays artists. So it's not, and it's also, and we've pointed this out before, but it's important to remember, not always, in fact, not often, just about money. There are often other things involved. When we were talking about the Detroit Symphony, there were issues of the other duties outside of just playing that these people would have, often involving outreach. That the musicians would have to undertake, and they wanted to do less of that. They wanted to obviously focus on the thing that they had been trained to do, which was play their instruments really, really well. And I think there are some things like that are involved as well. We talked about the timpanist of the San Francisco Symphony leaving to go to, I want to say it was Chicago. And one of the complaints that he had was that there was not adequate practice space for all of his percussion gear in the hall. So there are a lot of things that go into these negotiations besides just how much money they're making. And I think that's another thing that Alfidi doesn't really account for in his blog post.
Did you see his tags, how Alfidi tagged his post?
No.
Labels: greed, labor, San Francisco unions.
Yeah. I think
Just
I think he
greed
may
was
have,
the first tag.
well,
It's also in alphabetical order. Never mind.
sure. Well, I mean, he seems like the kind of guy that would have written exactly the same thing about any kind of union. If this was a discussion about auto workers or teachers or any public sector employees, I think he would have probably written something very similar about the union. I think he just doesn't like unions. Anyway, let's not get too deep into that one. Do you guys have any more thoughts on that before we get into our tech stuff?
No, let's go.
Let's go.
My thoughts are move on.
Let's go. So we started this last week. We are streaming this show in a Google Hangout that has one person and me. I'm a solo hanger-outer. And it relates to our next story, the Mondavi Center, which is a performance arts space in California, has been doing some new kinds of outreach using Google Hangouts to reach their audience and connect performers with audiences. notably, this article on New Music Box, a really interesting article by Dustin Soyseth. Is that how he says his name? I don't know. Sorry, Dustin. Points out, first of all, he compares it to the concert companion, which is something that I think we talked about on the show a very long time ago, which was kind of like live program notes during the performance of a piece that would let you know what was going on as the piece unfolded live, which people found a little distracting. But there are all of these efforts to make classical music seem less mysterious, and I think that's the direction that outreach should be going, is trying to make it less mysterious. And the Mondavi Center is using Google Hangouts, among other things, to make classical music less mysterious. And there are some excerpts here. I'm going to play an excerpt for you of the Mondavi Center's Hangout with a couple of members of the Calder Quartet. So let's play that and then we'll talk.
Well, the books, we were talking about books a little while ago. Books are great, right? Love books. But, it's an amazing achievement for a book to be in print for 10 years or to be in print for 20 or, heaven forbid, 50 or 100. It takes a whole lot of, that doesn't mean like a bestseller is no good now. It doesn't mean, there aren't important books written now, but there is something to the editing process of time. Mm-hmm. Sure, there are undiscovered works, sure, but there is something to like a consensus that builds around things and kind of weeds things out. But to get to that point, you have to create. Things have to be generated. They have to be made, and they have to be explored and interpreted and discussed. And they're all, the canon and what is being created now are completely intertwined. Right. One would not. There's no way any of it could exist without the other.
So there they are talking about kind of the difference between the traditional canonical repertoire and new repertoire that they're talking about for this series. I think it's really interesting that this is like an open thing that anybody can come in and ask questions of these artists, because often I feel like, and this is especially true of symphonic music, the larger the ensemble, but even with these small chamber ensembles, there's often this like wall between the audience and the performers. And I think people get that impression from popular music when there's just so many people there. There's no way that person could have a personal connection with anybody in the audience. But in the smaller audiences of classical music, and in particular classical chamber music, I feel like it's much easier for people to get that kind of connection. And they just don't think about it because it's not the way they're used to thinking about artists. What do you guys think?
What's interesting to me is in this piece, they also mentioned the DSO live stream project,
Yes.
And they talked to, I forgot the guy, Scott Harrison. He's the executive producer of digital media for DSO. That's a guy to have on the show. Anyway, he's talking about, she asked him what is it that, or he asked, excuse me, what is the program doing for the orchestra? And he takes sort of an altruistic stance. It's creating a relationship. It's, building a connection with an audience. And while it doesn't have any specific benefits you can point at in a spreadsheet yet, they're sort of accepting that that in and of itself has a value that they want to cultivate. And you got the same thing from the Mondavi Center person, because, they haven't, they in the piece it talks about how does this translate into ticket sales, and they say, well, we don't think it really has yet, but we need to build relationships with the community, and this is a way to do it. It's also interesting that they don't preach the idea that, okay, Google Hangouts are how it's going to work. We figured out the answer. They put it in terms of there's lots of tools out there, and we need to just attack the problem of reaching out to the community with the tools that we have and whatever works best. Not like this is the magic bullet kind of perspective.
Yeah, and they actually in the article kind of question the efficacy of the Google Hangout system, which is great. It's wonderful that they are so reflective on the things that they're trying. But I also like that you pointed out the ticket sales thing, that there's not necessarily this one-to-one correlation, and if there's an accountant looking over the time that they spent doing this, he or she might wonder what they're doing. but I think it's important that they are looking at this as more of a long-term problem,
Yes.
more systematic problem that they are not even necessarily solving for themselves. This is not a problem that's being solved just for the DSO or just for the Mondavi Center. This is a problem that is being solved for classical music writ large, or even the capital A
Cultural.
arts writ large. This is a thing that is a problem that we cannot solve by ourselves, but we can do our part to help solve. And then other organizations can hopefully undertake similar projects and be a part of this grand problem-solving process. Patrick, you
Yes.
do digital media for Boozy, right? Do you think this is similar to the kind of things that you do?
I mean, we haven't done like Google Hangouts or anything like that.
You should do it.
It is an interesting idea, though.
I would totally, for the record, I would totally hang out with Steve Reich.
Yeah. Totally.
I'll pass it along.
You'll pass it along to yourself.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
There's an interesting. Oh, go ahead, Patrick. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, you bring up a really good point. I mean, how many people out there, well, especially for a figure like Reich, really would like to speak with him, and speak with a number of composers. Not specifically just Boozy composers, but I feel like major composers today, people who have a strong following, could generate, I don't know, potentially thousands of people joining in a hangout.
And though I wouldn't say that it's necessarily something that has to be just for these giant names. I mean, somebody like we had Sean Shepard on the show last week. I think there are plenty of people that would be interested in hanging out with Sean Shepard, especially if it was tied to the promotion of a particular performance. If it was something that was part of something Boozy was doing, and also something that an orchestra was doing that was performing Sean's work, that might be a thing that it doesn't have to be 1,000 people. It could be 50 people. And this is the interesting thing about social media and new media, is that anybody can make it and anybody can push it to their friends. And if you get a core of just a handful of people, they become the marketing for your thing. So,
Yes!
If you get 10 or 15 people that really dig your hangout with Sean Shepard, they're going to tell all of their friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's when you were talking just a sec there, Dave. The thing that occurred to me is you got to remember that when you're trying to get these people involved in the hangout, you're not thinking, I'm going to go out there and get this person who I've never met. And this brand new audience member is not the goal. Well, I mean, it would be cool, but it's not really the goal of something like a hangout. It's to reach people that you have connections with and make them into more of a fan and strengthen that connection and help them build a network of interest around whatever this is. So don't look. It's not far and wide. It's about, people who are already connected in some way. Like the people who are going to go see a Sean Shepard hangout are going to have some kind of connection probably with him or the orchestra or the content of the art that's being presented or whatever,
Right.
It's interesting at the end of the piece, there's the last paragraph talks about technology in this kind of setting and how it's been received in the past. And he talks about the history of using, super titles in opera.
Yeah.
Maestro Levine apparently said famously, "Over my dead body," when asked about the possibility of using super titles. And then 10 years later, there they are, super titles at the Met. And, I think it's had a positive impact. I think people enjoy going and being able to follow the plot, even if they don't know Italian or whatever.
Well, or want to buy the libretto and turn the pages in their own little book in front of them.
Well, the libretto will come with it. It'll be in the program book.
You still get the libretto, but it's a pain to, I think, follow it. I like being... What?
Speaking of opera, I remembered we should talk about this sometime in the show in the near future, is Michel van der Rohe's Sunken Garden.
Yes.
Which is a 3D opera. And it is a mystery.
Is it like Clue?
Does
It have a different? Are there like different endings, like in Clue?
Oh my God! Don't even. I can't even talk about it.
Are you worried that you're going to spoil it, or are you worried that you're going to get off on a Clue tangent about Tim Curry?
I think both of those maybe.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
speaking of not that at all, but speaking of some different ways that people are using the internet to connect with people, one thing that we've talked about on the show before is Eric Whitaker's virtual choir projects. And these are some really interesting ways that he has used to connect with fans of his music by allowing people to record video of themselves singing a part of a choral work that he has written and submit it to YouTube, and then his team takes these videos and composites them all together to make a huge performance of these large choral works. And he's done TED Talks about this before. If you're not familiar, TED Talks, the Technology, Entertainment, and Design Conference, happens every year in, I don't remember, somewhere in California.
Doesn't it move around?
No, it's been in the same place everywhere for a while. I think it's moving soon to a new space, but that's not important.
Right, but they do have the TEDx events, right?
The
in different
TEDx events are like federated. They're like franchises, TED
TED.
franchises, and anybody can sign up to do one. I think that's a different thing. Right. Anyway, so he has recently put his third virtual choir together and performed it at the TED conference last month. And TED puts these talks up on their site in video format, and that video went up just a week or two ago. And it's another really interesting use of web technology. For the first time, the virtual choir included live performers. So they used Skype, just as we do here. If you're watching the video, you can see that this is definitely a regular old Skype window, and you can see the Skype logo up here. They had, I think, 30 people that all Skyped in live to this event. And I'm going to play just a little excerpt from this TED Talk. This is just going to be the part where you'll see the virtual choir come in, and we'll talk about what's going on here in a minute. But what I think is interesting, this is actually, I think, the same piece used in the first virtual choir, but he rewrote some of this stuff so that it would not, so that it would fit all right with the delay that Skype is throwing in. So as we've talked about on the show before, it's very difficult to have any kind of musical performance occur synced up over Skype because of the delay. And so he had to rewrite some of this stuff to, as he says, sing into that delay. So it feels a little bit more aleatoric than a lot of the stuff that you may be familiar with of Eric Whitaker's music. So here's just a little excerpt from Eric's Virtual Choir 3. So you see what's going on there. He's kind of made some music a little bit more aleatoric than you normally would hear in an Eric Whitacre piece. And I think it really works well for the harmonies that are in there, the kind of diatonic clusters that are there. What do you guys think of this live performance?
I think it'd be really funny if one of the live Skypers, like their mom or dad, came in and was like, "What are you doing in there?" or something.
Like singing and snapping near the microphone.
Yeah, you just see people like coming in and out.
That would be really weird to have like just one of those people isolated. You could see in the thing that there were
People freezing
and all kind. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know anything about that kind of problem.
No, we don't have any Skype technical issues. Our Skype is perfect at all times.
You know, this as a performance practice now opens up the possibility for like the virtual streaker, you know, like the person that wants to make a spectacle of themselves and run out onto the soccer field naked.
Photobombing the Skype?
Well, you could, you know, you got a Skype feed going to a live performance, and it's you've got a camera, but you've also got a computer that can feed anything you want into that video feed.
Right.
Streakers don't audition for streaking, though.
Yeah, well, you'd have to be an undercover agent, you know, and get past all the background checks or whatever they use to be a part of the Whitacre virtual choir.
How do you guys feel about the music having to be rewritten to account for some of the limitations of this format?
I think that makes perfect sense to me.
Me too.
Do you feel like that's I'm part of me thinks that's great, and that's exactly what you should do when you're in this kind of situation as a composer, is work with the limitations that are put on you. Though it also feels that in some ways I would want to push against that kind of false limitation. Like,
I think there's a clear distinction between rewriting something because it's easier and rewriting something because it's necessary.
Okay.
And this sounds like it's a necessary change. It's a practical matter. It's online. You know, you simply have to do it.
So then I think the question becomes, what is gained by this online, the addition of the online thing?
See,
like, what are you doing that is, you know, musically rewarding with these Skype people that you could not do if you just had? I mean, he's got a choir of looks like 100 people in the room from several different universities in the area. It doesn't seem to change the music that much when the virtual choir people come in, except that there's this interesting video of all these people sitting at home in front of their computers.
Well, it changes it in that you've got 30 people singing through individual microphones that is then amplified in some way. But you could do that on site. You could have 30 people in different spots singing, you know, through mics that are piped into the system. More interesting to me, talking about whether or not you're going to fight against the technical problems that Skype offers for syncing music up. I think it would be more interesting, instead of taking an older piece and rehashing it so it'll work with Skype, is write a piece from the ground up that considers the way Skype works as a way that you're going to go about writing the music.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
You're gonna put little indications in the score about, you know, at this point change your Skype settings to
I can think of one friend of the show who might be interested in doing things like that.
Well, you could include pure data patches so people can process their own audio right from their computer.
There you go. That would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Another musician that's using Skype in some compelling ways is composer Alex Shapiro. Alex is actually going to be our guest on the show in 2 weeks. Look for a program note somewhere in the next week or so about a time change for that one. But Alex Shapiro had a really interesting guest post on
Greg Sandow.
Yes, thank you. Greg Sandow's blog a couple of weeks ago. And she talks about her experience as a composer living in a really remote place. She lived in Los Angeles for many years, and at one point kind of decided that there was nothing that was really tying her to Los Angeles, and she didn't really care for Los Angeles that much, which I feel like is something that I've heard from everybody that I've ever known that's lived in Los Angeles, is that it's terrible and they just need an excuse to get out.
You don't do anything but spend time on freeways.
Well, sure. And I guess she decided that there was nothing about her compositional career that was tying her to Los Angeles, and she really wanted to live in some much more interesting, inspiring place. I guess she made this decision after a stint at the MacDowell colony. And so she found a place on the San Juan Islands off the coast of the state of Washington. And she lives in this really remote place. As far as I know, there are no bridges that go to her island, so she has to take boats places. She does have high-speed internet, though. And so she does a lot of her work as a composer over Skype and using other kinds of technologies to be a part of rehearsals of her works, to consult with performers during the compositional process. What do you guys think of a composer not having face-to-face meetings with the people playing her music? Do you think you... let me put it this way. Do you think you would be interested in moving to some remote island?
I don't... I mean, I would, but I think in a certain sense, I can feel it could be detrimental a little bit because... I mean, it's important in this business to make personal connections. Like, I mean, even after a concert or before a concert, going and grabbing a coffee or doing something like this, getting to know artistic administrators and programmers for different organizations. I mean, not all of that can just always happen over Skype. You need to just, I feel like you need to be there for some of these things.
So you're trying to say you can't have a drink over Skype? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. But I mean, apparently it's been working for Alex, and I'm really interested to see how.
Well, if you're speaking just directly how for specifically a composer, will this or will this not work? If you're Alex Shapiro, it'll work because you were already Alex Shapiro before you moved out to this island.
We've talked about this before with like offering, pay what you want schemes and things like that. I mean, generally we'll do better with bands who are already famous and who have had the label behind them for a while. Sure.
So, it would be much tougher to cultivate a from the ground up composer career if you started by, well, it's kind of hard to say that because if you get a doctorate, you've already kind of been immersed in, networking with people and stuff. But if your goal is to immediately finish your DMA and then move to an island, it's going to be tough to cultivate a career, I think.
Sure. She does a lot of the things that we've talked about on the show before. She has a blog that is not necessarily even specifically about music. It's sometimes about music and sometimes about just whatever. And it's this very it's a way for people to connect with her on a very personal basis, not just professional. And I think that's an important part of doing what she's doing. And maybe that's the kind of thing that helps with Sam, that issue that you identified, that you can't have a drink with somebody over the web.
Yep.
In fact, we had invited her to be on the show this week, and she could not be on the show because she is sailing to a nearby island and camping there for the weekend, which sounds awesome.
Yeah. And there's an interesting quote in the piece. She's talking about herself and others doing this kind of thing. We're using these new communication tools to stay connected and create different kinds of connections and network in new and different ways. She says, we're not mavericks. We're just fulfilling our job descriptions as creative people by using the tools of the day to engage musicians and audiences. And she's just recognizing, if you're making connections with people and talking about your art, ultimately, Skype doesn't fundamentally change you, and it doesn't fundamentally change the other people. And, people are connecting in these ways all the time now. So, it makes you wonder, did composers fret that the connection they have with their performers was going to be different once, the phonetic alphabet was developed or whatever, Yeah. I mean, oral tradition has ended, and now we're writing books about how to perform music, and that's going to change everything.
That's interesting. You wonder if any of these, because it's all happening online, if it's worth documenting any of this stuff for posterity. For 50 or 100 years from now, when somebody is writing their dissertation on the music of Alex Shapiro, are they going to want these archives of chat sessions with performers
of our SoundNotion interview with her?
Well, sure. That will certainly be available,
right?
But I mean these chat sessions with performers, these what she calls Skype rehearsals. So anyway,
the collected letters kind of genre of book,
exactly.
Could be if people. I mean, it seems like people will do it for big name composers, but it could be a much more interesting thing, like
ebook.
Or a website that has a wide variety of media types.
Sure.
There.
So moving from something that is very new and technologically sophisticated to a company that is very old, Steinway has finally sold their building. We've been talking about before that they've been looking for somebody to sell the building to. They have sold this building that has been home to the Steinway showroom for probably like 80 years or so, maybe, at least. They've sold it to some condo developers, so sometime in the near future, if you would like to live in the former Steinway showroom, you may be able to do that in New York City. They are going to, I guess, have some kind of leasing agreement for at least a short period of time, I think up to like 14 months or something in this building. And during that time, they're going to be looking for a new place in Manhattan for a new Steinway showroom. Apparently Steinway stock was up on this news, so the investors like them getting rid of this building. Apparently it just cost too much to maintain because it was such a historical space, a lot of old infrastructure involved, and hopefully they'll be able to find a place where they won't have to deal with that quite so much. And
so what you're saying is, Dave, the property is available, right?
It's totally available, and
I have 3 words. That new SoundNotion headquarters.
Yeah, right. That's what we're doing. We got a Kickstarter.
There we go.
If we can make $3 million in the next 90 days, we're gonna look for a place there. All right,
totally
everybody got that?
Worth it.
Yeah,
totally worth it. Oh, speaking of, this is a complete non sequitur, but I love NASA. There was a successful,
people? The space people or the saxophone people?
Both, but right now I'm talking about the space people. There was a successful, not Kickstarter, but one of those other programs.
Oh, I heard about this.
Yeah, to have like a NASA advocacy commercial. Is it like in the opening theater credits for the new Star Trek movie?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So.
That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I thought it was a brilliant idea too.
But NASA couldn't buy it themselves because they're a government organization. And so I guess that's why, hence Kickstarter.
So this was going to be something other people were doing for them?
I think so. It was I think the Kickstarter was created not by NASA, but maybe some other party. And basically they're taking 30 seconds from this existing movie or promo NASA film on YouTube or something, and they're going to play parts of it.
That's really interesting. NASA is actually, the space people are really good with the social media. They figured out 5 years or so ago that if they are going to continue to exist, it's going to have to be something that American citizens can tell their representatives that it's something that they want to fund, that they are personally invested in. And so they've been doing some really interesting stuff on YouTube, on Twitter. That if you don't follow them, they have individual Twitter accounts for the Mars rovers, which tweet in the first person, which is really funny. It's pretty cute.
So NASA's talking to the Mondavi Center and said, "Oh, you had a Google Hangout with some composers in your green room."
So they do that too. I think they do the Google Hangout thing at NASA.
We're sending pictures from Mars, pal.
I mean, you can't compete, really. What are you gonna do? So that was an awesome non sequitur. I like that. We should have one of those all the time.
Sadly, this week we had some deaths. Phil Ramones, who, I have to admit, I didn't know his name, but I saw it in the New York Times. And when you start reading his credentials, and he's got like 15 Grammys, and there's a picture of him standing there receiving a Grammy with Paul Simon for Still Crazy After All These Years in 1976. So, he's had a big hand in a lot of the music that if you heard those songs, you would sing along with, you would sing right along with a lot of the music he was had a big part in making during his career. Passed away at how old was he?
79.
79. He didn't get ripped off. And then sort of a really interesting story. Another person I had never heard of, but it was very interesting to read about. There's a Wikipedia entry about the magazine. Paul Williams, who is credited among some sources, let's say, as creating the first ever rock and roll magazine. Predates Rolling Stone and Cream and everything else.
Really?
He was a college student in 1966.
Was it like a zine?
Well, it had a bunch of different incarnations as sort of a pamphlet ranging to a full-on magazine, and then it became was relaunched again as a blog, and now it's parked on another music site, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes, another music site as a blog that's a part of that music site. And it's kind of all the content and stuff is archived there.
Cool.
But the guy, Paul Williams, went on and wrote a whole bunch of books, and a lot of rock journalists that you would know their names, and I'm not going to go through them right now, but you can read about it, really got their start. It was the first time anybody said, hey, let's talk and write seriously about rock music and not just, idolize the pop stars.
I do love a good pop culture archive.
Yes. Yes. So anyway, he passed away, and he was only like 64, I think. So he did get ripped off a little bit.
Speaking of pop culture archives.
I thought this was a very interesting story just because it's NPR. Was it NPR?
Yeah.
Had a story. No, it was
it's
New York Times.
Times, sorry.
That was, for some reason, I didn't have that article open. Sorry, Dave. New York Times had an article asking what are the top 10 voices in the history of metal. And that just struck me because it's such a distinctive style of singing, And even if it's not your cup of tea, I think from sort of a just like an honest musical standpoint, if you were to listen to like a bare vocal track of some of these really good metal guys, it's a pretty virtuosic, very they're singing, and they're singing very accurately with great pitch and with great time, and oftentimes music that's very rhythmically complex, and it's just sort of the pitched screaming quality of it. I like it because it's a 20th century invention, and it's sort of its own thing. I think it's really cool.
How would you compare it, Sam, to the kind of singing that one would do if one were performing perhaps an opera by Donizetti?
Well, it's all screaming, right? I don't know. To me,
wait, you're saying that the bel canto and the metal singers are both screaming, whatever.
It's all screaming.
It's all screaming.
I talk harshly about bel canto style singing a lot, and people will make arguments that inside that tradition there's all kinds of variation in personality between voice to voice, and I don't deny that that's true. But in the realm of pop music, there's a lot more variety in voice to voice because the music relies more on distinct personality in the voice, whereas I think the argument could be made that bel canto style singing relies more on turning the voice into an artifact that's more like an instrument that sounds like this. However, having said that, I think in metal, it kind of suffers from a little bit of the bel canto kind of thing in that there's a way of doing it, and they all sound, all these metal guys sound more similar to each other than just a random conglomeration of other kinds of pop singers, Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's totally. I just wanted to nail you on that singing thing one more time because I hadn't done it for a while.
There's a pretty prescribed sort of performance practice in how metal is done,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So that's gonna do it, I guess, for this week's show. We're gonna leave you with a Sam bel canto screed, because we haven't had one of those for a good long while. Thank you so much for joining us. What?
What's our deep cut?
What?
Oh, we have a deep cut. We'll get to it. We do have a deep cut because there's no guest this week. We have a deep cut, and we'll play that at the end. We'll stick that at the end. This week's deep cut is "Rag" by William Albright, called "Brass Knuckles," performed by Tony Caramia. You should definitely check this one out. It is a lot of fun. It starts off sounding crazy and wild, and then goes into much more not traditional, but
Billy Roll Morton-esque.
yeah, more what you expect when I say that it's a rag. It just a cool piece. Check it out for sure. William Albright, you're gonna love it. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this week's show. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us live. We're doing this show live now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, on YouTube, so you can watch either on our YouTube channel or you can watch it at soundnotion.tv/live. And if you load the page before we start streaming, you're just going to see the old archived videos, so you may need to refresh once we start. And you can comment live on the show on the YouTube channel. So we appreciate everyone who is doing that. Also, you can, of course, as usual, submit your comments on anything we talked about. If you have any comments on how you connect with people on the web and how that impacts your classical music or arts outreach, we would love to continue that conversation with you as we talk about that thing on an almost weekly basis here at SoundNotion. And you can do that at our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at SoundNotion on Twitter. I'm at Dave McDowell. Patrick is at Vox Shibuya, and Nate is at Housegoy.
What? And Nate
Sam
is at Housegoy?
I pointed to Sam and said Nate. Sam is at Housegoy. Nate is not with us this week, but if he were, he would be at a Nate tree. Sorry about that. What was I saying? Yes, Twitter. If you would like to submit a story or any kind of other thing for us to talk about on the show, you can do that by tweeting with hashtag SNWeekly, and we always look at that when we're preparing the show. You can subscribe to the show in iTunes and catch every episode, or you can just watch them on our site. That's cool too. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that by using the Amazon affiliate search box on our site, and just buy your regular Amazon stuff through there. You won't notice any difference, and we get a little commission. Or you can support our show directly by donating money to us using the links there on the site. This SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you back next week. Oh, and I should say, you know what? I didn't even plug our guest next week.
You did earlier in the show.
No, I didn't. Our guest next week is Mirne
next
Shim.
week.
Next week we have
that's right.
Mirne Shim, who
Friend of the show.
longtime friend of the show. She was the very first person that we ever kind of cold called to be a guest on the show. So we're very appreciative when she stops by. And the week after that, we'll talk to Alex Shapiro. So stay tuned for program notes. Those are both West Coast people, and our start time is a little early for them on the West Coast sometimes. So we may be starting a little late the next couple of weeks. We will tweet the new times. So stay tuned. Now, for serious, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you back next week.